Alrighty, and we're on. So I'm
Fantastic.
here with Luke Martin of Sydney West Martial Arts. Hey Luke, how are you?
Hello.
So I reached out to Luke a while back actually via socials, and I said, hey, I'd love to do a podcast with you. And then funnily enough, then we caught up at a couple of MMA events. So one of the things that I've been transitioning into since I've left, I suppose, full-time work, so to speak, is I'm doing a lot of these commentary events and commentary for martial arts gigs and things like that. And that's something that I've always been passionate about. But then when I had the chance to catch up with you in person, I said, I'm that Johnny Yapps guy that reached out to you. And then you're like, okay, yeah, we'll do this podcast, blah, blah, blah. So that's how we got here.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Appreciate it. Sorry we haven't got to do this earlier. I think we've been trying to make it happen for a few months, but we're here now. So let's have a chat. Let's do it.
All right. So I guess, where I normally like to start is generally going back to the beginning and obviously talking to you about, childhood and things like that. But I guess the first thing I want to touch on before we go into that is that you've got a cage grappling event coming up at Wollongong Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Talk me through, how did that come about? Did Joe just reach out and say, hey, you want to do this? Or
Yeah, it's an odd one because I haven't competed in over 3 years now.
Yep.
So, I was very busy on the competition scene from white to black belt.
Yep.
And particularly when I started Sydney West, I started it in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And at that stage, the way I saw it, I didn't have a lot of I didn't have any students, so I had to kind of do the competing myself to show the wares of what we were doing.
Yep.
And so I had to go out there and show, like, kind of put my money where my mouth was.
Yep.
So I competed a lot, and then as the team grew and became bigger, I kind of retreated back a little from the competition side of things and took more of a coaching role. And what that allowed me to do was put more of my time and emphasis on coaching, and it actually improved the team substantially better. So I was fine with that.
Yep.
But, I still train every day and I love competing and I love training. So, but I don't, when I say I love competing, I'm not in that sort of stage where I'm a young 25-year-old athlete that's looking to still go out there and make a name and be on Polaris and be on EBI. That's kind of in my mind behind me. I'm not saying I'm too old. I'm 37 at the moment, but I'm probably more towards the back end than the front end when I look at these guys that are like 20 years old and just phenomenal now. So for me, it was a competition was something that I hadn't hung the gloves up, but it was like, it would just be here and there where it suited me. I didn't want it to be something that took away from the training, from the coaching.
Yep.
So Joe Lopez that runs Wollongong Wars, we were just organising matches for the MMA boys, and he said, we're going to do 2 grappling matches. Do you have any boys that we could put in? And obviously I thought of a few of the guys, and I mentioned Suppo's name. He's one of our top guys, and people love to watch big behemoths. So that's interesting. So I threw his name in there, and I said, look, I mean, if you can find me something interesting, I'll have a crack. This sounds like a bit of fun.
Yep.
And he got back to me nearly immediately with a Brazilian's name, Lucas Lacerda, I think his name is, from my BJJ, not my BJJ, Life BJJ.
Okay.
And I don't know Lucas, but it just looked like a fun matchup.
Yep.
And he's a black belt, and he's on the competition scene. I think he does more gi than no gi, but he definitely, I've seen him competing in no gi, and I thought, why not? This is a good match that I can just take. I don't have to take away from the team. I can keep just training as normal.
Yep.
And that's been really nice because mentally it's not putting any heat on me. It's just I'm just going to jump in and have a good night. I'm actually looking forward to the night, as opposed to being like, okay, all my eggs are on here. I got to really focus. Like trials, for instance, like that would have taken me a lot away from the coaching side and more into an athlete sort of mentality. So it's not that I'm like underestimating this match. It's just that I'm not allowing it to dominate me. It's going to be fun. So I mean, it's going to be good. The only thing that's a bit kind of shitty is that for some reason he wants to do it in gloves, which is weird. Yeah. And I think it looks a bit weird. Yeah, we're going with gloves on. People want us to punch each other.
I'm sure you can probably come to a gentleman's agreement.
I mean,
and say, look, fuck the gloves. Let's just grapple.
Yeah.
We're not throwing strikes. It's not combat jiu-jitsu. It's no slashes.
Joe's reasoning. He's like, I want the guy's hands protected on the cage, and obviously I respect Joe Lopez. He's a very experienced martial artist, but I'm not sure why. I don't think that's a big issue.
You should be grabbing the cage anyway.
We're big enough boys where we can deal with that. But I might try and make mention. But look, it's his show. Yeah. If we agree to it, we've got to do whatever he wants. But that's the only thing that's a bit weird. But other than that, it'll be good fun.
Yeah. Look, it's funny. What you just said actually resonates a lot with me. So I've got a year on you. I'm 38.
I'll be 38 in March.
Oh, there you go. Okay, I'll be 39 in February. So
okay.
So I do have
you got a year on
I've
me.
got a year on you, and I recently competed up at XFC 60, and it was a very similar thing. Like, I don't need to compete at the end of the day, but it was just one of those opportunistic things there. It's like, you know what? Like, I competed 10, 12 years ago MMA, and back then there was like MMA wasn't the scene that it was today. You know, like and as well from coaching and things like that. It's like, it was the Wild West back then. Like, in terms of amateur, it was most of it was like pancration, competing on wrestling mats through PCYC.
Yeah.
So they were the first things that I did, and then it went to Luke Pizzuti from Lions Den. When he stopped doing cage fighting championship, he went back and did New South Wales AWMA, so like an amateur style circuit, and it was combat grappling. So that was a little bit different to pancration because it allowed the hits to the head and things like that. But that was when I last competed, but never formally got in the cage. And so when they offered me an opponent who had some experience, that was his sixth fight. So it was a good opportunity, and so I thought, there's no pressure on me. I went in there, I had a blast, I won.
Awesome.
And it was good because I'm much like you. I'm in the gym every day, I'm training. So I was like, okay, like sometimes it's like, what are you training for? Right, and there's only when you make martial arts your life, it sort of comes to that fork where it's like, okay, well, if you're not competing, like, what are you doing with it? Yes, it's a lifestyle thing, but if you're only just training for yourself and you're never really passing any of that knowledge on, then it sort of becomes a bit of a waste as well, because it's an opportunity to obviously grow the next generation. And I always think about that Albert Einstein quote about being on giant shoulders, that the only reason that we can look as far as we can is because we stand on the shoulder of giants, right? So likewise, when you're passing on your jiu-jitsu knowledge, it's like when we look at this new generation of grapplers and MMA competitors that are coming through, like the level is so high now as a result of it. Right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and it should be. I think if we're doing things correctly, it should be. But that wasn't how jiu-jitsu went for a long time. I mean, there was obviously progression, but I mean, I started jiu-jitsu in 2005. And, I mean, it was still just old, crappy jiu-jitsu. It really was.
Yep.
Really, there wasn't a big change until John Danaher really changed it with him sharing his style of jiu-jitsu with people online. Until then, his students were doing well, but really everyone else was just doing old-school, shitty jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
So it's funny, we've only recently had a huge upturn. If we were looking at it as a graph, it would be fairly stagnant, and then it would take a fairly sharp upturn. The whole of particularly no-gi, I'll make reference to no-gi. I'm not going to speak for the gi, but I think the gi has also had a lot of change as well recently, probably also due to the online instructionals and people sharing more knowledge. In the old days, people didn't really share a lot of knowledge. YouTube wasn't a huge thing, I want to say, in 2005. I think it existed, but it wasn't.
Yeah, it wasn't
like
the resource it is now.
It wasn't the resource it is now.
Yeah.
I mean, people can just go on there and get a lot of information. If they're like, how do I defend this move? And they can probably find something. They probably find hundreds of things. So people are like able to learn quicker if they're clever enough. And it's a really fun time to see how fast you can make people good. Yeah, that's what I kind of am interested in, is not just making people good, because you get someone for 10 years. I mean, sure, they're going to be like pretty they should be competent. If they're not, I mean, Jesus, what have you been doing? but in 2 years, what can you do? Yeah. In 3 years, can you make a world champion? That's cool. Yeah. And it's been shown you can do that. So if you've got a dedicated athlete, you've got a dedicated coach and team, that's where I'm at the moment. That's really cool. And it's like, can we keep replicating that over and over? Because then it shows me it's the system we're operating under. It's not just random athletes. And it proves that it's the information and it's the way we're delivering it. And that's what I really enjoy the most. Yeah.
Well, I think there's a real stark contrast. Like, and when you mentioned how jiu-jitsu was back in 2005, like that's like most traditional styles, right? And when I say traditional styles, let me talk about karate, kung fu. They're styles that I've done, when I was a kid, and I did kung fu for 20 odd years, right? But the mindset in a lot of those.
What's this? There's a kung fu guy, right? And he was, I saw a video, and he had his uke pick him up off the ground. His uke picked him up, and then he said, "I'm gonna now turn on my huang gong or something," and then made himself heavy, and his uke couldn't pick him up. Yeah. Do you believe that shit is real?
Okay. So
sorry to bypass you.
Look, this is a really, really interesting question, right? And the reason why I I deliberate on this is because like I would say like I was a Kung Fu fanatic for 20 odd years, right? I was really into it.
Mm-hmm.
And to the point where, you sort of get a little bit brainwashed in the sense that you think, okay, because this is like, if you go back 20 years, so actually, well, let's say I stopped Kung Fu in 2019. So you go back to say 21 years from then, that's how long I'd done Kung Fu for. So 21 years back, so you're talking about 98. 98 was when I started. UFC hadn't happened yet. Like all of these things like weren't really...
UFC had happened, in 93.
Oh, sorry, okay. It wasn't mainstream.
Gotcha.
So when I say is, so let me get back a step. So it wasn't mainstream. So you didn't really, like back then, people still thought it was all about the style, right? And styles make fights and it's about the style. The style's going to make you great. And that was the mindset that was sort of passed on to me. And then I think the other thing that sort of resonated for me, there's a cultural element there because, I'm a Chinese guy. This person's also got a similar background to me, and it felt like, oh, okay, there's a cultural fit there. And when you start thinking about history and you try and go through the history of things, you start thinking, if a lot of Japanese karate, so Okinawan karate, they say came from Chinese Kung Fu. And the reason for that is because Fujian, which is one of the provinces in China, is on the southeast corner of China, and it's right next to the border with Japan and Taiwan, essentially. And so what had happened is the fishermen would go fishing, and then they'd go land on like the Chinese coast, and they'd pick up these skills and they'd bring it back, and that's how Japanese karate was developed. So like there's specific...
Does the Japanese agree with this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, so there's a particular form. It's called sanshin. And that means 3 battles. And that form exists in Japanese karate and exists in Chinese Kung Fu. So especially the style that I trained, that was like the beginning form of the Kung Fu that I had trained. But for the Japanese karate, that was actually a black belt form for them, right? So this is all, people can go and look it up, the forms out there. You can see very, very different iterations, like every style practices it slightly different as well. And so, people get into this mindset where you almost want to believe as well, right? You want to believe that, perhaps this is true, perhaps this can work. I would say that there are things that I've seen that, I haven't been able to compute how that is possible, right? So, but there are things that, I feel like it's almost like when, as an instructor, because you've got the respect of the class, sometimes people don't test your bullshit, right?
I mean, it's one of the most important things that I always try to do. Like, I have my guys trying to fucking tear my head off every day, and I never want to be in a position where they were holding back on something and didn't do it because they're like, oh, that was the coach. Like, we don't do that here.
Yeah.
And if they can get me, if they can hurt me, if they can, they'll do it. And I want that. It's. And I hold myself to a very high standard that if I'm teaching them something, is this the absolute best thing they could be learning right now?
Yep.
And then obviously way before that is this even a real thing?
Yeah.
Like, because you see people just teaching people stuff and you're like,
yeah.
Either it won't work at all or it just won't. It'll only work against someone who's very, very naive.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
Some of these things that we're starting to talk about here, though, that's kind of nearly talking, well, not nearly, they're literally talking about magical forces.
Yeah. It's unconscionable because it gets to the point where if you're teaching,
it becomes about faith. It's nearly like we're doing a religion thing.
Yeah.
And I don't see the correlation between that and the physical activity of martial arts.
Yeah.
Because you can have all the faith in the world that you can knock out Francis Ngannou, but once he puts his hands on you, it doesn't matter how much. Yes. So I just, it's a real bugbear of mine that people, even in this day and age, are still teaching things like this.
Yeah.
And clearly taking advantage of people who are, for whatever reason, a little more gullible or whatever. Or they've just gone in and they're like, this guy is the master.
Yeah.
He's told me all his expertise and he's trained under this guy and whatever. I mean, you've heard it all before.
Yeah.
And I'm just, I hate seeing it. It's just basically taking advantage of people.
Yeah.
And especially in a thing that's supposed to be as real as you can get. I mean, the idea with martial arts is that people go into martial arts because they want to be able to help themselves if they were to get into some type of physical altercation. That's right. Basically why everyone starts.
Yeah, that's right.
They're like, you keep going because it's fun and it's whatever, but pretty much everyone starts because they're like, shit, if something happens, I'd like to be able to do something.
Yeah.
And like teaching them pretend things is just, it's just so wrong.
Yeah.
And I just can't believe that it's still happening, but
so
I'll let you keep going.
Yeah, so essentially that's what happened with Chinese Kung Fu, is because originally why was Kung Fu taught in the first place? Well, it was to be able to defend yourself. It was taught as a means to fight wars. So, Kung Fu wasn't traditionally a hand-to-hand system. It was more of a weapon system because, when you go back in history, like majority of the time people were fighting with weapons, whether it was swords, spears, you name the type of apparatus, poles, whatever they could use. You wouldn't be training to fight empty-handed. You'd want to have a weapon of some sort to obviously tip the odds in your favor, right? But then as you go through, and there's a great video that's online about, there's a guy explaining about, Kung Fu moves and I guess how they've been derived from weapons, like, how you would hold a sword or how you would use specific weapons. The problem is that, once you take out the pressure testing element and the combat element, that's how you end up with something that just becomes flowery and devoid of the original purpose, right? And I think the other thing that, for anyone that doesn't, that may not be experienced in terms of, what have they gotten themselves into when they go and visit a martial arts school, I think the key delineation is this, right? If you go to somewhere to learn something, right, and the idea is that the master is the master and you will never be as good as the master, you're in the wrong place. Because all you got to think about then is that, okay, for you to get this master, how many masters have there been before? Let's say there's been 3, right? So if the lineage is 3 people long and the skill set of that person, that the original master was 100%, they knew everything about that art. But when they passed it on, well, the next person could never be as good as that master. So therefore, they've only got 80% of that, right? And then, so that person's only starting with 80%. The next person only gets, say, 80% of that again. Well, 0.8 times 0.8, you end up at 64%. So by the time you've gone through 2 masters who have only got 80% of the original and 80% of the original, or 80% of the second generation, I should say, you're at 64% of the knowledge before you even get to you. So what hope have you got of being any better than what that person was or what your master is?
I mean, it's a very odd mindset anyway, this whole thing that you can't be better than that guy. I mean, because this is the thing that with martial arts, it's not just about the techniques and information.
Yep.
It's a huge component is also, their athletic ability, their general strength, their flexibility, their ability to overwhelm or overcome bad positions and how tough someone is. All these are huge factors as much as the techniques themselves.
Yep.
So, there's so many variables there. I can't believe that that's even something that's portrayed to people. It doesn't even make sense to me. It's like a broken mindset, but it's a very odd mindset.
Well, I dare say let's talk about traditional jiu-jitsu. I dare say there was probably a bit of that mentality as well up until the information became more open source. So when I say open source, now we can watch tape, we can watch matches, and I think, part of the mindset shifted because we can now study jiu-jitsu, people saw an opportunity. I'm not saying it was necessarily opportunistic, but the idea was that, okay, if people are going to be able to unpack what we're doing anyway, well, perhaps there's some logic in then teaching it so that they can actually learn it properly, first of all. And then there's also the monetary aspect of that. Hey, we can actually, make some income from this as well. Yeah. So I think that's what helped to elevate jiu-jitsu and take it to that next level is that, so as an example, I remember when John came out and did a seminar at VT1, that would have been maybe like 2017 or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I was there. I think Jeremy was there at that time as well. And I think that was, I can't remember when his first instructional was coming out, but he said something like, he'll have an instructional coming out on this in the near future. So
yeah, it might have been about 2018 or something like that, I think 17, 18.
Yeah. So there you go. So it was like, I think, people realize that once there is the information available for everybody to look at, well, anyone that's really interested and engaged and switched on can probably start to study that and start to understand and go, okay, why are they doing these particular things? And they may not have the complete logic down pat, but then through experimentation, if you can see, like as an example, the straitjacket system, like that was one of the first things I think that was released. I think Jeremy even posted about the straitjacket system back then on Reddit or something like that, and talking about, the hand traps and things like that. And it's like, okay.
If I can try to get Jeremy off Reddit, that's a cesspool.
Look, I never read it either, but I know that I think when I caught up with him once at a comp, he goes, oh yeah, my post on the straitjacket started going off or something like that. But yeah, like I think that's one of the reasons why Jiu-Jitsu has gone through this sort of revolution in that sense, because through studying the information first. So, and I sort of, we sort of jumped all the way to Jiu-Jitsu, but we might as well keep talking about it because we're here. When you study Jiu-Jitsu, because I know you like to watch a lot of tape as well.
Yeah.
What's the split for you in terms of percentage instructional versus percentage match footage?
I'm not hard and fast on all these things. Like there might be periods where I'm doing more match study, maybe just purely because more matches happened just recently. So, for instance, around the time of ADCC, there's now like, I don't know, let's say there's another 20 odd hours of matches to watch. Maybe even more than that. Yeah, that's going to probably increase my load of match study. Versus when there's maybe not as much going on, I might. So I don't have like this hard. Each week I do X amount of time doing. It doesn't work like that. I kind of do it. And that's the big thing with the way I do this whole thing with my coaching, and that's why it's not easily. I'm getting more and more people approach me now, and Instagram's good for this. You know, as much as Instagram's fucking terrible for the human race, it can be good for networking with people, I suppose, and people being able to contact where you might not normally have made that connection. And I'm getting more people want to contact me who are in coaching roles, who are kind of asking, okay, they're recognizing, okay, Luke's doing some good things and he's producing guys from nothing to something pretty quickly. There must be something going on. So people are starting to ask, and it's not that easy to just quantify in, it's this amount of percent of this, and it's not that black and white. And because I look at it as a living organism. It literally is a living organism. So I'm deliberately not hyper focused on the exact structure as far as breakups of things. I do it, and I think this is how John operates as well. He does a lot of watching the organism and seeing what it requires at that point in time. And I kind of do the same thing with my study as well. So, I might feel like I need to be watching a little bit more. Specifically, I might be wanting to watch a match on an individual athlete, or maybe positions that came up. Last ADCC, there was a whole lot of high ball battles where people have one hook in and they're trying to achieve the second hook. The opponent's turtling. And so if you want to kind of study up on that and see, okay, why were a lot of people failing there and why were they succeeding in the defense, I've got to watch match after match. So I might put time into that. So it kind of depends on what I'm trying to work towards. I don't have a hard split, but I definitely recommend people do both. What I do think can be difficult is if you're more of a beginner and you're still comprehending what the actual overall game is, it can be hard because you're watching something you might not necessarily. It's like I open up the iPhone here and I say, have a good look at it. Can you work out like what's going on there? You'd open up, there's fucking circuit boards and shit. Like you can work that out. It's too. But if that was your game and you already understood that, you could look at it and maybe you could learn something from that. It's like that with the Jiu Jitsu. Beginners, they're probably better off learning maybe more step by step or instructionals and things like that. And then they could start to implement match study, but they still need to be kind of coached on how would I go about doing match study. If they just watch it for the entertainment of a match, that's kind of not useless, but it's not the best use of your time. And that's the other thing. People need to use their time efficiently and effectively. A lot of people, I'm a professional jiu-jitsu coach. That's, I think, the best way to describe what I do. I dedicate a substantial amount of my life to studying and practicing jiu-jitsu. But let's say your average hobbyist, he's at a job, so he's probably there 10 hours, including travel, maybe somewhere in that zone each day. He's got X amount of time he's going to come to training. He's got to eat. He's maybe even got a family or something. So he's only got, how much time does he have to actually do study? So like whatever he does in that little bit of downtime he might have, he needs to be very specific with it. If he's just sitting there watching a match with the commentary blaring and they're saying shit that's wrong half the time, it's like maybe it's not all that useful. So. That's probably a skill. That's probably a skill that's worth learning for people. And eventually, I'm starting to think to myself. So I've never done any instructionals or anything because I feel like it's a bit rude of me to do an instructional when everything that I've learned is somebody else's material. So it's kind of odd for me to. You see a lot of people doing instructionals. You're like, that's not your information. That's your coaches or someone else. Like you've just literally stolen. Some guys just like steal or John stuff and. Even if they're not affiliated with him, and just teach that. That's right. Which is kind of interesting. Anyway, put that aside. I've never done an instructional because I'm like, well, if I'm showing this stuff, that's Jason Rousey showed me. Like he should be able to do that. And if I show this is John's or this is Gordon. So it's like, how do I take ownership of that technique and then teach it to people? So, but what I do think to myself is maybe the skill that I have that I could help people with is more on that kind of how to learn or how to coach side of things. And that might be something I look at doing eventually is, trying to do a better job of helping people learn faster.
Yeah.
And that might be a thing.
Well, I think you should also give yourself a little bit more credit. Like, even though you may have learnt something from somebody else, that doesn't mean that after you've filtered it personally and you've distilled that information in terms of how you approach and how you then articulate that as well, you might still have a slightly different take on it. It's just like, if we just take arm bars as an example, we can say, okay, well, what's important in an arm bar? We can talk about, the spinal alignment. We can talk about the shoulder, the elbow, and all of these sorts of concepts. But how you articulate it would still be slightly different to how perhaps, John might articulate it, or Jason, or someone else. And I think, I wouldn't get too carried away in that notion that it's not my concept to teach, because at the end of the day, that's like saying, that would be like me saying, oh, well, a punch, is only a kung fu technique, but a boxer throws a punch and a kickboxer throws a punch. Like, we all can throw punches. But
yeah, no, I definitely see what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I've had this, monologue in my head, but I let John and Gordon and Jason do a lot of the heavy lifting. They're the guys who have a lot of experience, and they've proven it time and time again that they can produce high-level athletes that can compete with the best in the world.
Yep.
So, in my mind, they articulate it pretty fucking well.
yeah, of course.
So, yes, some people might gel more with the way I deliver,
Yeah.
and that's what happens in my training room.
Yeah.
So that's fine. But as far as me to sell and monetize somebody else's intellectual property, it just seems dirty to me, and that's the way I look at it. I appreciate what you're saying, but I feel like I'm trying to profit off someone else's intellectual property. So I mean, I'm doing it in an indirect way because I'm running an academy.
Yeah.
But it's I don't know, for some reason I differentiate between that and then filming it and setting it out into the internet, because. But anyway,
it's interesting. Yeah. Like, see, I try and do a little bit of that, because I will study, MMA fights and, do my own sort of breakdown on the fights that I like to study.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily for profit. Like, a lot of the times it's because I've seen something in a fight that I go, oh, this to me is an important battleground in this fight. And we might have seen this particular scenario play out, 4 or 5 times in the match. And off the top of my head, like, I'll name one. So Martin Nguyen versus Tan Lee, there was a very specific striking setup that Tan would use, and the way that he would exit, he made it very difficult for Martin to set up his right hand. And when you clip all those things up, you realize just how many times that specific scenario played out. And so then, I like to then go and pinpoint on those particular scenarios and then try and identify, okay, how would I do things different, or why was this so effective, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't look at that as, you're not stealing anyone's intellectual property there. That's
sorry, one championship,
but not whatsoever. Like you're watching a match unfold, and then you're giving your interpretation of what's happening. I still think that's different to John saying, "Here's 5 steps on how I want you to finish a back strangle," and then me teaching an instruction.
And
here's 5 steps to teach him. That's what I mean.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's fair.
Because I think I would be quite comfortable in breaking down match footage, and that's totally cool,
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the way I look at it with instructional. There's a lot of people monetizing other people's intellectual property, and it's it's just fucking wrong. But anyway, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's now wind it back.
Sure.
Because I said, I want to go back to the beginning.
Sure. Yeah.
So where did you grow up, Luke?
That's a pretty big question. So, from birth until about, say, year 6 in school. So what would I have been then, around 11 maybe, somewhere in that zone?
12.
Yeah, somewhere in that zone. From birth, so my first sort of 10 years of life, I moved a lot. My old man was a paramedic, an ambulance officer.
Okay.
And he was early into the job, and he just got moved from station to station to station. So I was born right out west in a town called Wellington, which is a little shithole about 4.5 hours from here.
Wow.
Out near Dubbo. It's sort of, you just go west of the Blue Mountains and keep going.
Keep going.
And so we predominantly moved around out there. I think on last count, I've moved about 40 times in my life, 40 different houses. So there was a lot of moving, changing. And it wasn't until I moved into Penrith, or Richmond, Penrith area in about high school, and then kind of stuck in this area since then.
Yep.
So yeah, I was born right out west, and then moved into the Penrith region, maybe halfway through my life, and been there ever since. Yeah.
Was that so? When you would move houses, did you have to change schools at the same time?
Yeah. So I went to, I think, about 6 different primary schools.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then I guess, when you reflect on that, did that make it, do you find it difficult to make friends, or was it easy to make friends? Like, do you feel like that had any impact on your personality?
I mean, I don't think it's a good thing. I think moving kids around a lot disrupts them a lot. But I'm very able to deal with change, and I don't know if that's because of that's how I am, or if it's because of the way that I grew up, just never having a lot of stability.
Yeah.
So I don't know why, but I mean, I'm happy with the outcome. Do I want that for my children? No. I want them to have a nice, stable.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's good. They can grow up in one spot and have a friendship group they sort of have all the way through. That's all fantastic. But I don't look back. I'm very against victim mentality, and I never ever allow myself to have a victim mentality. So I never look back and I'm like, oh, poor me, I could have done this, could have been better, or this guy had the bet. Like I mean, yeah, some people have had really fucking horrendous upbringings. I'm not talking about the extreme end of the scale, but generally, I mean, people like to kind of act like they've had a harder run than they have. I didn't have that, but moving around and changing was no big deal. It's funny. I generally would describe myself as an introvert. Like, I don't go out seeking to be around people, but then in my job role, I'm actually around a lot of people and have a lot of interaction with people. It's kind of unusual, but if you just left me alone, I would probably only have a very small group of friends, immediate people. Yeah, that's just how I operate. Obviously, with the academy, I have like network. Hundreds of people each day that I'm running into, and that's cool. Like, I'm cool with that. It doesn't make me feel uncomfortable or anything. It's just part of how we operate. But if you left to my own devices, I would be more probably introverted and pulled back. I don't know if that's because of the whole moving around, but the other positives was I deal with change really well. Yep. Not much shakes me.
Do you have any siblings?
Yeah. I've got a full sister and I've got 2 half brothers.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've got and I have a half sister. Jesus, there's a fucking few. Yeah.
All right.
So I have 2 sisters and 2 brothers, effectively.
Okay.
Yes.
I guess, so 2 questions. The first one is, when you were a kid, so throughout all that sort of moving around and things like that, like, how would you describe yourself as a kid? Were you an introvert then, or were you more outgoing as a kid?
No, I'd say I was definitely introverted. Like, I was quite a kid. Yeah, I wasn't. I'm probably relatively outgoing now.
Yep.
But I mean, you can definitely change. I mean, that was like 30 something years ago.
Yeah.
So there should be some sort of progressional change, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I was a pretty quiet kid.
Yep.
Yeah.
What were the things that you were into? Do you remember?
Well, I always played sports.
Yep.
Yeah, I always played sports. I played soccer up until probably about the age of, I don't know, 9. I was okay. So I've never been the best athlete. I'm still not the best athlete at all. I'm like, I wouldn't say I'm a bad athlete, but I'm not, like, I see in the training room, I can spot good athletes straight away. I can spot them. They've only got to be. I only got to watch someone move for a little bit. I'm like, that guy's got some athletic ability. I didn't have natural great athletic ability, just middle of the road, and then I could, if given good information, I could pick things up. So that goes a long way. I played soccer, and then moved to baseball. Played baseball for a lot of years, and I was about 18 when I stopped playing baseball. I was playing good grade, first grade of baseball. I was, I would have liked to have played a very high level and kind of, I mean, everyone that plays baseball and wants to play a high level wants to play for the major league. Like that, the idea is that you get picked up and go to the States. But I was never quite good enough, I think, for that. I definitely wasn't. If I was good enough, I would have got picked up.
Yep.
And I got to a point where I was just kind of over the team sport thing. And I had a buddy that we were really into MMA. We'd been watching like the old UFCs on tape since about when did we start watching them? Maybe about 2000.
Yep.
And we were watching them, and it was just like, this was cool. And my buddy, he wanted to fight. He's like, I want to do this. And I'm like, oh, geez, that's fucking, like, because like, people were getting hurt. And I'm like, I don't know if I really want to do that. Like, I wasn't a guy that wanted to get in fights and things. And my body's like, we got to do this. So we ended up just finding a place in town, a shitty jiu-jitsu gym in town. And we're lucky. He was pretty cool. He he said to us, look, if you want to do MMA, my gym's not the one, but you should go to my friend Elvis and Anthony. They both fight for the UFC. That'd be where to go. So that's how we got bumped on to Anthony and Elvis, and then that's where I ended up, training with those guys until black belt. So it was a cool little progression there. But yeah, I came through team sports and then switched at about around the age of 18. roughly to jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. So you didn't have any prior martial arts interests as a kid?
Nope.
Really? Okay.
None.
Interesting.
Zero.
See, I was the opposite. I was a kung fu kid growing up. Watched all the Jackie Chan, Jet Li movies.
Yep.
Really into I did karate from the age of 5 to 12, and then had a break for a couple of years because we moved house as well. So I actually used to live out in St Clair. And
my condolences.
Hey, it wasn't that bad. It was a cul-de-sac. It was a nice little place, number one paradise place. And
St Clair has a lot of nasty shit happen. Didn't someone get beheaded there recently?
Well, it's probably more. This was back in from 84 to
It was better then.
Oh, it was okay.
We've got one of the boys here, one of our brown belts. He's a good guy, Curtis, and we give him a hard time. He lives in St Clair, and you got Collerton, which neighbours onto it. I don't think Collerton's ever been very good, and he's very specific about the fact that he's not part of Collerton. He's part of St Clair.
One story I will share is that so I've got a brother who's 7 years older. And that was going to be my second question to you in terms of sibling dynamics. But I've got a brother who's 7 years older, and we used to have these massive cactus trees that were outside a couple of windows. And because I was into kung fu and a kung fu kid,
to stop people coming in the windows, probably.
Well,
it's probably tactical.
Probably tactical. But my brother sidekicked me out the window so that my ass landed in the cactus.
Lovely.
Yeah, and so I remember that's a memory that's really stuck with me. And my mum had to pull the cords out of my ass. So, but yeah, I was always into martial arts from a kid. I used to train at a karate place out in Penrith, or around that St Clair area. I think it was called Goshinkan. It was a Japanese karate school. And then so took a couple of years off when we moved into the hills area, Borkham Hills. And then after that I started kung fu, and I was there for 20 odd years, and only towards probably the last 8 years of my kung fu training that I started to then cross train and do other things as well. So my question to you, my second follow up question was in terms of sibling dynamics. I guess how was it? I guess from a blended family perspective, did that change any of your perspectives, or I guess how did you feel about having a blended family, so to speak?
About the fact that I ended up with my parents split up. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and you got some half siblings as well.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I just deal with whatever is thrown at me. This comes back to that thing, and is that I never allow myself to be a fucking victim.
Yeah.
So I never looked at it like I'm hard done by. My parents aren't together. You just adapt to the new thing, and I'm very good at adapting to things. So. And again, I don't know if that's because of how I'm made up. I think it's a little mixture of that and circumstances. But, I want nothing but my kids to have a very stable upbringing, but they're not going to be probably as good at dealing with shit going wrong for them. So that's something I'm going to have to address.
Resilience. Yeah.
Resilience. I'm going to have to try and, incorporate that somehow for them in other ways, I suppose. But I've always been, pretty good at not letting that. So I never looked at it as a disadvantage or an advantage. It was just, it is what it is. If you'd said to me as a kid, would you rather your parents be together? I suppose every kid would say yes.
Yep.
But that was out of my control. And then once you're old enough to understand, you go, well, you're probably better off with them not together if they don't love each other and not happy. Yeah.
Did you ever use it as motivation?
No. It was just, it wasn't even a thing. It was just, it was like, this is my circumstances. This is something I do all the time. It's like, okay, these are my circumstances. Recently we nearly got destroyed by COVID, like a lot of small businesses. And I'm like, I definitely was pissed off, and I did a bit of whinging about it to my immediate family and friends, and even online, which I wouldn't normally do, because I felt like I was being
unfairly targeted.
Yeah, definitely. And but then you just go, okay, well, this is the current circumstance I'm in. I can either push forward or I can fucking give up.
Yep.
So I think that mindset is something that has always been useful for me. I don't let too much bother me.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always curious about that. I guess for me, I use some of those negative things that happened in my life to be fuel to the fire, and use that as motivation to just really focus on something and turn into something positive. But I guess, you know, from that perspective, I'm very much like you. If you were to ask me, would I change anything in my life? I'd say absolutely not. You know, I'd probably say, you know, I'd like everything to happen maybe just a little bit faster because, you know, I would have learnt those lessons a bit sooner. But I wouldn't change anything because I wouldn't be the same person.
I mean, you're the sum of what's happened so far in your life. So I suppose you consider to yourself, if I'm always wishing away this part and this part, well,
you wouldn't be you.
Am I the person I am? Now, maybe if you're really unhappy with who you are and you think all those things that were the reason why you are what you are, well, maybe then you do wish those things didn't happen.
Yeah.
Like I said, some people have really fucking horrible shit happen to them, and I could see how you could
take it that way.
But I mean, it still comes back to, at the end of the day, it's like you can't change. Once shit's happened, you can't change it.
Yeah.
So
you can only choose how you react to it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a very important tool to learn, I think. Otherwise, you just become triggered by everything. And it's like, you see that with people now, where it's people who have really had no hard times in their life, and the things that are triggering people now is shocking. It's like, really, that's your biggest problem. Wow.
I'll share this story. So I once had a customer. So I used to work in a Mercedes-Benz dealership, and I was the general sales manager there, and we'd ordered this specific car for a customer.
The Chinese love Mercedes, don't they?
Yeah, they do. Well, look, before that, I was actually running a Holden dealership. That was a lot harder for me.
Yeah, selling the bogans.
Yeah, like I had, you know, once I took a phone inquiry and I was talking to this customer, and he came into the dealership and he goes, "Where's Johnny?" And then I come out and go, "Yeah, I'm Johnny." And he goes, "You're not fucking Johnny."
Nice.
And I go, "Yeah, I'm sorry, mate. Like, but I am." Yeah. And he's like, "Oh, sorry, mate."
That's hilarious.
So anyway, that was my my experience with Holden. But anyway, when I was at Mercedes-Benz, we ordered this car, and the customer, you know, obviously waited for the car to get built. But there was one specific thing that when the car turned up, they weren't expecting. The seatbelts were red instead of black, and it was a massive drama. And
the big thing with the red and the Chinese, right?
Well, that customer wasn't actually Asian.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
my mistake to assume that.
Yeah. You bigot. Yeah. But anyway,
cancel me.
So yeah, the seatbelts were the wrong color, and like in my head, like after we'd been through it for about 15 minutes, I was like, look, if you don't want the car, it's fine. You know, like just. I'll return your money. I don't need this drama in my life. Like, let's just move on, right? You're unhappy with us. I'm so sorry that the seatbelts have turned out, you know, to be the wrong color. If you don't want the car, have your money back. We'll move on. You know, I apologise or whatever. You know, I can try and source you another one, but, you know, reality is you might have to wait. Long story short, they apologised after and just said, look, it sounds like such a first world problem. And I'm like, it is.
A little bit, isn't it?
A little bit. Like, you know, but yeah, at the end of the day, you know, we can't judge. Like, it's that whatever's the worst thing that's happened to that particular person is the worst thing that's happened to that particular person. You'd love it for everybody to be a bit more understanding and, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you can't, definitely that is, if that's the worst thing that's happened, you're right. But people need to be introspective to some degree, and that's probably something that everyone could do with a little more of, is the ability to just take half a step back and have a look at the situation and be like, and I do that a lot. You know, I do that a lot. Like, let's say, you know, I'm talking to my wife and it's something she's worried about with the kids. I'm like, let's just take a second here and have a think about this. Like, is this, I mean, I probably use this as an example too much, but I'm like, there's poor people out there with little kids with horrendous things going on with them, or they were born with, you know, genetic problems, or they have fucking leukemia or something horrible. And I'm like, is this problem we're encountering really the biggest thing? It's not really. We can work around this, and I think it's good to use perspective.
Yeah,
you know, I think it's a really important tool.
It's a powerful tool.
Yeah,
right. That self-reflection piece. You know, I used to call it the rule of thirds. You know, everybody, if you think about it, you know, there's always the setup, so the beginning. You know, there's the actual activity, and then, you know, there should be this component of reflection. But if you look at how most people live their lives, they're either so anxious that they're always living in the future, or they're so regretful that they're always living in the past, or they're so focused on the present that they never spend any time to do any of the other things. You know, why I got really big on that concept is because, you know, in the sales industry, so to speak, so if you're selling cars, like, sales guys would get nicked all the time because you'd have a customer that would, you know, just be a real asshole to you, and that could wreck your whole day, right? But it'll be like, okay, before you go and speak to any other customers, go and take 10 minutes, go and refresh yourself, go for a walk, whatever you need to do, put that bad experience behind you, because at the end of the day, you got to remember that even though that might be your third or fourth customer for the day, that next customer that walks in, you're the first salesperson that they've seen that day. So whatever shit you've dealt with just now, you need to actually just take a moment to reset yourself, and then, you know, we can reflect on it and go, okay, why did that interaction not go the right way? And then reset yourself so that when you talk to the next person, you're in the right frame of mind to then execute what you need to do. And I think that rule of thirds applies, to all combat sports. You need to make sure that if you're trying to execute something, you're in the right mindset, you've got the right setup. There's no point trying to pull a specific move if you don't have the right setup. And then when the match is done and dusted, if you never go back and watch it, how are you ever supposed to then go and rectify the mistakes that you made, right? And I think, that's a real sort of real world sort of rule of thirds kind of concept.
Yeah. No, I like that idea. You didn't answer my question. Do you think these guys can make themselves heavy out of nowhere? These kung fu guys that magically make themselves heavy and you can't pick them up? Because I would happily test that.
Yep. Yeah, like I think I would say I think it's more of a subjective feeling as opposed to something objective. I don't think you could make it so that you jump on the scale and you've added 2 kilos or 5 kilos or whatever the case may be, right? But subjectively, I feel like people can then make it feel like, so as an example, like in Jiu Jitsu, right? The guy that's 100 kilos may not feel like 100 kilos when he's on top of you because he has no concept of how to hold his weight, right? And a lot of the times he might actually be framing on the ground or have his knees on the ground so that the weight isn't actually on the other person. It's a very similar thing. So, objectively speaking, no, I don't think you can make yourself heavy to the point that people can't lift you.
I don't mean heavy on the scales. I mean the demonstration that I'm referring to. His partner grabbed him in like a front bear hug.
Yep.
And lifted him up, and then he did his magic stuff.
Yep.
And then he couldn't lift him up.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's, like I said, I think that's a subjective thing. I think there's a subjective element to that.
Because I just think to myself, imagine if I could just teach everyone here to be so heavy you could never be lifted up. I mean, Jesus, that's
great.
Pretty useful tool, right?
But the problem is that it doesn't. This is the problem with the way that Kung Fu is, not all Kung Fu, so, some Kung Fu is taught. So let me be specific here, is that if you're focusing on these really intricate level techniques that aren't going to apply in 90% of the scenarios, you're actually doing your student a disservice, right? Because at the end of the day, why are we teaching things that don't fucking work, right?
I mean, I would say that's 100% waste of time, not just 90% waste of time. Anyway, I'm just interested. Yeah. I'm not giving you a hard time. I just fucking hate fake shit.
Yeah, I agree.
Anyway.
Yeah. So, let's go back a step. So, in high school, I guess 2 questions. What kind of a student were you? And then the second thought, or the second follow-up question to that is, did you have any idea what you wanted to do when you finished school?
As far as what sort of a student I was like, okay. It was like with the athletics thing. I said I wasn't the best athlete. I wasn't the smartest kid at school. I wasn't like the kid who just aced every exam, but I think my intelligence was reasonable. And that's something I assume. It's pretty narcissistic of me to assume that. I've never had an IQ test. I kind of wish I had, so I could know whether I'm a fucking idiot or whether I feel like I'm slightly above average. That's what I feel like, but I'm probably not. I'm probably like 99 or something. I'm just barely operating. But I was like middle of the road, but I didn't apply myself. Yeah. I didn't like. It's probably still to this day something that I work on is I generally don't like authority. And it's not that I dislike authority just as a blanket. I just don't like being told what to do if I think what they're telling me to do is incorrect.
Yeah.
And I always felt like I knew better than the teachers, and I probably didn't. I definitely probably didn't. I was a fucking idiot. Like I was a 13, 14, 15-year-old kid. So, but I felt like these idiots would tell me to do things that I didn't agree with. So that was probably an issue for me that I probably could have spent less time being abrasive and more time just getting on with it. But that's the hard thing with school, is that you've got these young, especially young boys, you've got these young minds that are not fully developed whatsoever, but definitely have a lot of ideas about things. So they're smart enough to have these ideas on everything, but not really smart enough to actually implement them properly.
Yeah.
And, you can kind of waste your time. I mean, I'd probably waste a lot of my time at high school. If given the opportunity now to have no commitments, to have your parents feed you, house you, pay for everything, and all you have to do is go to this place and pay attention, I mean, that's a fucking great opportunity as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But I spent more time not wanting to do it than do it. Yep. So it wasn't enjoyable, and I hated school. Yep. I hated school. Just because I just felt like I was going somewhere I didn't enjoy what was going on. And now I actually I educate myself every day. I can on new things.
Yep.
Like, so I've kind of flipped eventually. So I was an average student. I think I was smart enough, but didn't apply myself whatsoever. And having an issue with authority was definitely problematic. But what was the second part of that question?
So did you have any idea what you wanted to do? When
Oh,
you
right. No, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. No, I had no idea. I knew I didn't want to go to school anymore.
Yep.
So I finished year 10 and my mum said, well, okay, that's fine if you don't want to go back to school, but you've got to do something.
Yep.
And I'd always been a hard worker. I wasn't lazy. So from the time I was 14, I got a job at Woolworths. Like as soon as I was old enough, I think they would only take you at 14 and 9 months was the thing.
Yep.
So I was like, okay, as soon as I turn that age, I'm gonna go down there and get a job, and I did. And it was fucking miserable. It was a shit job. It was like a checkout chick.
Okay.
So you talk about the salesman thing. Like I just had ladies just abusing me all day, the whole shift. That they're not happy the bag wasn't packed right or whatever. Just a fucking miserable job. And I think I was getting $4.50 an hour.
Yep.
That was my rate. And I would do a 4-hour shift, so I'd take home about $20.
Yep.
Which I thought was pretty good. But I mean, now it's like I wouldn't even imagine spending 4 hours of your time for $20.
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway,
I think what's a fucking meal at McDonald's now? It's like $15 for a meal now.
That. I mean, I think I bought I remember I think one of the first things I bought. You got a discount at Big W, right? Because it was Woolworths, so you got a discount. And I bought the Blink 182 Anima of the State DVD, not DVD, CD. And I remember being like a little bit freaked out by it because, the front of it had like a chick with kind of like a boobs out a bit, and I remember being a bit like, oh, this is pretty risky, 15-year-old kids, 14-year-old kids now are probably looking at hardcore porn or something. I don't know, but anyway, I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew I was like motivated to do things. I wasn't lazy.
Yep.
And so Mum was like, look, we got to probably find an apprenticeship, a trade of some type, and I had no idea. And we literally just looked through the newspaper, and Public Works was the name. It's a government department. They don't exist really anymore. They're called the Department of Public Works, and they were offering some apprenticeships, and there was two. They offered electricians and they offered stonemasonry, because they looked after all the government buildings. So a lot of the state library and all these old beautiful stone buildings in the city, they needed like qualified stonemasons to do the upkeep on them. Yeah. So I wasn't sure which one I wanted to do, and thank fuck I didn't do stonemasonry. I mean, it's just a miserable, hard job, hammering away at stone.
Yep. Chiseling.
I think the Egyptian slaves would probably knock back on taking that on as a job. And so I chose electrical. Yep. I interviewed, I did well, I got the job. So at 15, I started in 2001. At 15, I started my first year, and I was a tradesman by the time I was 19.
Yeah,
so,
wow.
Yeah, but I had no idea what I wanted to do, and it's a really hard. I get some of the young guys here ask me, like, I don't know what I want to do, and I think the big thing is, this might not be the thing you do for the rest of your life. And
Absolutely.
look, I actually even kind of hope it's not. I hope that just the decision you made when you were 14 wasn't the decision for the rest of your life. Yeah, and that's the tricky thing. There's a lot of pressure on that. Yeah, for young kids have been told this is a really. I think you got to do something that gives you skills though. So I think if you're going to do anything, do something that's going to give you skills. So if you're going to go to university, make sure it's a fucking course that is useful, because it's you're going to spend. Not an arts major. Jesus Christ! I mean, you're going to spend so much money on all this money and debt for a course that gives you nearly no. Like a lot of people, they're doing courses, and I'm like, so what does this allow you to do? And they're like, oh no, pretty much nothing. Yeah. And they're just doing it. They're just going through the motions because they don't know what they want to do, and it's a big decision to choose something. So they choose this random kind of bland degree that doesn't lead to anything in particular. So it's a very tricky thing. Yeah. But I think just choose something that gives you some skills, and I'm happy that that's what I did. Like being a tradesman, is generally a pretty useful tool. Yeah.
And you've always got it there. Like I've got a mechanical.
Yeah.
I got a mechanics trade. So I started. I did an apprenticeship as well. So
fucking miserable job, mechanics. It's
filthy dirty. Look, sparkies, plumbers, like they're actually better jobs than being an automotive technician, because at the end of the day, most of those guys will go out and start their own business. Whereas as a mechanic, like most of them don't go and start their own business. Yeah. And so the lion's share of the money is always going to the business operator, as opposed to the poor mechanic working on the car. But when you think about it, right, they're all equally important. Like I would say to apprentices that would come and want to work on cars, and I'd explain to them, guys, like I need you to understand, don't just think of it as you're working on a car. Think of it as if this was your mum's car or your sister's car or your brother's car or one of your family was driving this car, and let's say for whatever fucking reason you didn't do the wheels right and the wheel flies off when they're driving down the M4 at 100 k's an hour, how are you going to feel? Right? Because that might not be your relative's car, but they're related to somebody. And that is somebody's mum or somebody's sister or somebody's dad. And so every time that you work on a car, you need to treat it with respect. It might be the 20th car that you service today. Doesn't matter, because same thing.
I mean, that's a fair rule for most things you're going to do, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're going to do most things, do it. That's something I generally try and do. If I'm going to do something, do it well.
But how do you explain that concept to a 15-year-old? You know what I mean? Like it's...
Well, like I said, and sometimes they're just literally not ready to receive the information. You're a fucking idiot. And that's why them having access to Instagram and spewing horrendous things to everybody in the world that has an Instagram account, that's a bad part of society. You know, I mean, that's a totally different subject. But yeah, and I'm not. If anyone young is listening to me, they might be thinking, you know, he's just fucking discrediting me. I'm young, but I know what's going on. Well, I was young as well, and I'm saying I was a fucking moron. And like you notice like super, and you still have progression, but you definitely notice progression. Let's say 15 to 20, and then 20 to 25, and I mean I think it's 25 is when the male adult brain starts to actually form, and you so then you kind of can continue to adapt and improve, but like there's a big change that happens from the time you're 18 or 15 or whatever it is, and you're not as risky, and you know there's a few things, and I think as long as you could be aware of that and be like, yeah, I've got my ideas on things, but also be willing to maybe learn from experience of someone who's a little older. That's probably a useful tool as well. Yeah, it can save you from having to make mistakes.
Look, I'm still a fucking idiot, but I was an idiot up until I only really started to grow mentally. I would say, so I'm 38 now, so say when I was like 32 or something. And I credit that to the actual podcast genre. Like I used to, when I was working in Wollongong, then I'd have an hour drive, an hour commute. So what would I do? I'd throw on a podcast. And I learned very quickly to start listening to things on 2-speed, so then I could double the intake of information.
Very interesting. Some people do that with, I know Baby Dave, one of my top students, he does that with instructionals.
Yep, I do that too.
I think it's because he's autistic, but you're saying it's a useful tool.
Yeah. I listen, like I used to listen in 1-speed, but then I realized very quickly. So it wasn't like I just jumped from 1-speed to 2-speed. It was like 1-speed, then I went to 1.5 speed. I'm like, okay, my ears are now quick enough to then intake this information. So dial it up to 2-speed.
So it's really just applying that strategy of kind of speed reading.
Yeah. Right. So then, in a 1 hour drive, I'm getting 2 hours worth of content.
Interesting.
Right. So in a day,
do you think it makes you slightly impulsive in some degree, where you you can't wait for things, you need everything? Because there's also a certain thing to conversation and the pace of our conversation. You know, the how fast I talk or how slow I talk might be in relation to what I'm trying to put emphasis on. Like, do you feel you lose some of that? Because sometimes podcasts aren't just about the information as such, you know? Yeah. Like, do you lose some of the...
I think what I realize is that Joe Rogan sounds a lot smarter on 2-speed than on 1-speed.
Gotcha.
Right? Because I think sometimes when you listen to it on 1-speed, you can really tell when he's stoned. But on 2-speed, even when he's stoned, he still sounds intellectual. And I think part of the problem for me is that I have to realize when I'm having normal conversation like we are now, I have to actually slow down. And you've given me coffee, which then also dials me up as well. So,
but that's also an individual thing. Some people just, they think fast and they talk fast.
Yeah.
I think I've probably learned to try and slow down, particularly when you're delivering to people.
Yeah.
If you speak too fast, you can definitely skip over things and you can get ahead of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I definitely learnt that just from delivering to people over and over and over.
Yeah.
But then there's like the opposite side. You listen to someone who's like a southern guy who Rogan had a guy on there a few weeks ago
who Will Harris about the farming.
Yeah. And it was fine. I'm cool to listen to that, but he was particularly slow. Like people would probably get bothered by that.
That was a 2-speed episode.
You would have him on 3-speed probably.
Yeah, like I just got used to intaking the information at that rate.
Yep.
And I know for most people, when if they were to go and listen to that podcast on 2-speed, I can't understand a word that they're saying. It's a conditioning thing. You know, as with anything, if you condition yourself to it, you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't go straight to it because then you go, oh, this doesn't make any sense. But if you slowly, work your way up, then, I view that as a competitive advantage. If I can intake information at double the rate somebody else is taking it, that doesn't mean that every time I was in the car I would be listening to a podcast. I'd actually have moments where sometimes I would just listen to nothing. and just have silence so that I can work through my own thoughts.
Yeah, I'll do that as well.
Yep.
Hey, Bobby, can you move my car for me? It's just out the front. The keys are back there somewhere. It's a little black Mazda. Don't crash it, please. Sorry, people.
No.
The parking cops around here are fucking assholes and they're savage.
Yeah, no, fair. Okay, so you got your electrical trade.
Yeah.
And then did you then go out and be a sparky for a while, or what did you do?
Yeah, so I became a tradesman at 19, and I wasn't a qualified tradesman until I turned 20, I think, because back to that kind of not really enjoying schooling, I didn't enjoy TAFE. So I loved when I was on the tools, and then once a week for the first 3 years, you have to go to TAFE, as you know.
Yep.
And I fucking hated it. I hated going back to a classroom. I hated having this dickhead telling me things that I didn't care about. And I saw no useful connection between what they were teaching me majority of the time and what I was actually doing. And I'm like, what the fuck are we doing here? Like, if you want to teach me a course, like, why not make it useful to what I'm doing? And again, maybe I was just being young and a dickhead, or maybe it was a mixture of their courses don't hit the mark correctly as well.
Yep. Was yours a classroom environment?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
majority, yeah.
So when I went to TAFE, I had the choice of doing classroom or self-paced, and I couldn't stand classroom, so I just went straight to self-paced. So they offered that at Hornsby TAFE, so as opposed to going to Blacktown.
They might just offer that to the Asian students because they know you guys could just teach yourself. Us fucking idiot white kids that meant to do at TAFE, and geez, left alone, they'd be at the pub all day.
Well, yeah, like I managed to finish my TAFE course in 2 years.
There you
and then, finish my apprenticeship in 3. So it just helped to just speed things along.
You just put it on 2-speed.
Yeah, basically. That's the story of my life, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because I was doing uni at the same time. So I did an engineering and a law degree. And that's meant to be a 5.5 year course. And I finished it in 4.5 years. But my circumstances were a little bit different. Like, why I was so gung-ho to finish things at that point in time is that my parents were going through a very rough period, and my mum had some issues with mental health. And so that made me very self-sufficient in that sense. My brother was 7 years older. He was overseas or wherever he was. So essentially I was like on my own. So, that's part of the reason why why do an apprenticeship when you're studying engineering and law? Well, I wanted to do something that I had some interest in, first of all. And then at the same time, it's like, okay, well, I need some money to pay the bills. So, to buy my uni textbooks, to do all that. So I had to self-fund myself basically from there. And they were the sort of things that motivated me to push as hard as I could. And so, it was sort of convenient to then tell my workplace, look, I'm doing a part-time load to make them okay with me going to uni, but I was still doing full-time. And then, doing a 30+ hour a week, one day a week at TAFE. And then, that's why I just pushed my way through that so I could just get through that part of my life. But I do remember, having nightmares about it, years after. It was like, I'd go to sleep and sometimes I have this nightmare that I've got an exam that day, and I'd wake up and I'd be like, fuck, I got an exam, and then have to look around and go, no, that's all in the past. It's done.
Well, my problem was I didn't care about the exams, and that's why I took an extra. I had to go back at night and make up this particular boring course that I failed, and the reason I failed it, my issue was never my intelligence. My issue was not applying myself, and I see that in people, and I talked to Bobby Sandu, who just went out there. I talk to him all the time about this. His issue is not his intelligence or his understand. It's his application. He doesn't apply himself. I talk about this all the time, and because I've been through it as well.
Yeah.
So I had to go back at night, and that was a bit of a punishment for me fucking around because instead of going to TAFE, what I recognised was I just started seeing my girlfriend who's now my wife with my kids, and I realised going to the beach with her was a lot more fun than going to TAFE.
Of course.
So we'd go to the beach and no one would know about it, but I failed the TAFE course. So I had to go back and do 3-phase induction motors, which was I'll always remember that course. And anyway, so I became a tradesman at 20. I was like finished at 19, a tradesman as such, but I couldn't get my license until I was 20 because I had to finish that course.
Yep.
So I did that. And I did a year working for a company just doing domestic stuff and a lot of shop fit outs, and I didn't really like that. I'd gone from public works, which was government department. It was very relaxed.
Yep.
The government department's just burn time. There's no rush for anything.
Yep.
It's like the same was as always tomorrow.
Yep.
And so a job that in the private sector would get done in a day would take a week.
Yep.
And then I went to the private sector and everything's just a rush.
Fast.
And I'm like, okay, I don't really like this. And I had family members in the working in the prison system, and I thought, you know what, that's another government job. It's pretty stable, and maybe that'll be some fun. And so I went down that direction. I work for them. I worked for corrections for about 12 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, in that time in corrections, you would have seen a lot of shit, I'm guessing.
Yep. I mean, you work long enough in jails, you see a lot of shit. Yeah.
Are there any stories that you can share?
I just don't give a fuck about it. I don't like. I've pushed that out of my life. I fucking despise. By the end of it, I despised that job.
Wow.
I absolutely loved it in the beginning because it was new and fresh, and I was very young, and I actually nearly thought I was doing something good. I thought I was doing this good thing, and then I realized, wait a sec, I'm just a cog in a system here that's really doing nothing. Like, it's not like putting people good back into society or helping. It was just. All it was just babysitting people who didn't want to be there.
Yep.
And it was a miserable job. It was quite negative because you're around some of the like worst people in society, and they don't want to be there. None of them are like. I'm not saying all the crooks were bad people, because there was plenty of guys who were just decent guys.
Yep.
But there was also just your like habitual, lifelong junkie scumbag crim who was just a pain in the ass to deal with. There was nothing positive to come from that, and every day the interaction. And that's what like probably most of the prison population is.
Yep.
It's like lifelong crooks.
Yep.
And they're just a pain in the ass to deal with.
Yep.
You know, you see them wandering up and down the street in Penrith here every day, you know, in the little bit of time that they're out of jail. And so I didn't like it. And I was quite lucky, or I made my own luck. I suppose I make my own luck.
Yep.
I picked up a job in our training unit, where they teach, weapons and officer survival and all that stuff. And so I moved into a teaching role after about 3 or so years of working in the jails, and I spent a fair bit of my career there, and that was great. So I wasn't in a jail. I was just teaching people how to shoot and how to do defensive tactics and how to do cell extract. I was teaching people things. I wasn't dealing with crooks. It was great. I loved it. And I found that I had a real passion for teaching. And I found that it was something that I think I'm good at. I was good at imparting knowledge. If you can give me enough time to learn a subject matter, I can teach other people that subject matter. It was something that I think is a bit of an innate skill. It's definitely something that is learned, but it's also something that some people are just better at. And it's something that I took to. I think I was a much better instructor than I was at really anything else I'd done. And that's kind of what led me to where I am now, is that I got to a point where I was like, I really like Jiu Jitsu. It's my favorite thing to do. And I have a bit of a talent for teaching. I'd never wanted to start my own gym, but I was like looking what the other people were doing, and I'm thinking, these people just absolutely suck. They might be okay at Jiu Jitsu, but they're not good at teaching people things. And so it just kind of grew from there.
Yep.
And it's kind of led us to where we're at today.
Yeah. So okay, let's talk about SWMA now. So what was the genesis for you to then go and say, okay, well, so were you still working when you started this place?
Yeah. So what happened was the training unit job that I had, which I loved, I would have never left that job. Okay. So the only reason Sydney West exists is because they restructured and they changed the training unit, and they pushed a lot of us out of training and back into roles where we're back in the centres, and I didn't want to be doing that.
Yeah.
So I picked up a job back in the jail, and I just hated it.
Yeah.
I absolutely hated it. So I was like, okay, I need to come up with an exit strategy.
Yep. And
like I said, I saw other people running gyms. I didn't really want to. I had no experience about business. I knew nothing. But one thing I've always done this, and I pride myself on it, is I do research on something, and then if I finally decide to pull the trigger, once I've done enough research to where I feel like I make educated decisions, I don't just react.
Yep.
I wouldn't come up with an idea today and then tomorrow go, okay, I'm going to open a gym.
Yeah.
Like it was a long time of thinking about this.
Yep.
And then it got to a point where I'm like, okay, I think I can do this. And once I pull the trigger on it, that's it. I'm all in. So, I went through the process of starting all the things. The first thing you do is you get a name, and then you actually buy that name, and then you start a website, and all the things. But I had to work full time, because you've got this when you start a gym. All these people look at a gym and go, "Oh, they're lucky bastard getting to do that." And it's like, well, there's a fucking lot that happened to get there. There's also a lot that has to happen for it to continue to work each day.
Yeah.
You start with 0 students. So unless you somehow stole a bunch of someone else's students, or there's situations where that crazy sort of thing happens.
Yep.
But I had nothing. I had no students coming to me from anywhere. There was no other real gyms in Penrith. There was maybe one, but like nothing. There was really nothing of any utility out here. So I was starting from scratch, just with a blank space. So you start with 0 students. So you have to work. I had to work full time. So I was still working full time in the jail, absolutely fucking hating every moment of it, and trying to start this thing. And I did that for about 2 years roughly, until I was just burnt out. Like I was running classes, and the business is not making any money, and you're just chewing up your own funds till there's only like a finite amount of time before you run out of money.
Yep. And
I got to a point where I had enough members just to cover my outgoings, but I wasn't making any money.
Yeah.
And so I needed my job just to like be able to pay for bills. But I was realizing, without me giving this thing more of my time,
you can't grow the member base.
I mean, so I was in this predicament, and like most things, I had a good think about it, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to commit to it. So I did what most government employees never do, which is I pulled the trigger and fucking left.
Yep.
Like, you talk to a government employee about leaving, and they'll look at you like you're a fucking idiot.
Yep.
They can't believe the idea.
This is the best job in the world.
They're like, no matter what the job is, they're like, yeah, but they kind of get brainwashed into thinking there's nothing else.
Yep.
They nearly get brainwashed into thinking this is all you can do. You talk to police officers, AMBOs, you name it. The government employees get this mindset of this is all I can do. And I knew it wasn't all I could do. I knew I could do something else, but I knew there was going to be this period where I was going to have no income and I was going to have all my bills. So I jumped and I made it work. And, what is it? 2014 we opened. So is it 8 years?
Yeah, it's 8 years to now.
So a little over 8 years later, we're still here, and not just here, we're doing well as far as what I actually care about, which is the quality of what we're providing.
Yeah.
Are we doing as well as some, random, cookie cutter McDojo that just is built around pumping out memberships?
Yeah.
No, those guys actually make a lot more money than I do, because I don't operate like that at all here. Like I don't spend all my day calling up people and trying to chase. I spend my day studying Jiu Jitsu to be better for the people.
Yep.
If people decide to come in here and they want to do a class, great. And then if they want to come up to me and say, I'd like to sign up, great. But they will never get harassed by me.
Yeah.
Plenty of people will come in and leave, and I haven't even spoken to them about memberships.
Yeah.
For me, if they didn't want to sign up, well, that's fine.
Good.
Like my plan isn't to sell them, trick them into signing up.
Yep.
They'll. So I'm not the best
salesperson, so to speak.
I'm not the best. I'm not a salesperson. I deliberately don't
Avoiding
do that.
Yeah.
I deliberately don't do that. It's by design. And now you might think I'm an idiot because maybe I could make more money if I did that. But I have a certain set of principles, and one of that is for me is that I only want people training here who want to be training here.
Yeah.
I don't want anyone training because they had a good time their first night, signed a 12-month contract to something that they actually weren't that into.
Yeah.
Or they realised they weren't that into, and they were just stuck with it. Like I'm not interested in that.
Yeah, well, I also think it comes down to where your personal interests lie as well. Like you look at anyone that's got family, that time is a priority, right? So then you go and you look at your week and you go, okay, how can I structure my week to get the most effective use of my time? And if that particular task doesn't resonate for you, it's better off that you just don't do it because it wastes your time. Right, you're better off using that time more effectively for other things, and that's we talked about it earlier in terms of how I don't really do a great job in promoting the podcast because I don't have an interest in that. Like I think the right people will find it, and over time, all I need to do is just keep putting the work in, and like I'm 70 something episodes in, and over time that number will grow to 100, 200, whatever the case may be. At some point, it will find its audience. Like I'm not really too fussed about trying to force it. If the conversations are good and people enjoy, the guests that I have on and the stories that are shared, and maybe some of those things resonate because, they touch on similar upbringings for certain people in certain circumstances, that's great. And if not, well, at least for me, I've had a great conversation. Like I never really think about it from the perspective of the listener. I always think about it as, I want to obviously find out more about your story, and it's almost more to satisfy my own curiosity more than anything else. And just on that, like I'm a bit curious, when you made that jump to go and say, okay, I'm leaving the prison system. What did your partner say? What did your wife say?
Yeah, I mean, she's she's very supportive, and I've always done a very good job of committing to whatever it is I choose to do. So she always has the luxury to some degree that if I decide to say this is what I'm going to do, there's a good chance I'm going to make it work.
Yep.
There's a good chance I'm going to execute on it.
Yep.
Because I don't just half-ass things.
Yep.
So I think she has a little bit of she's quite relaxed, but also she's understands that I'm probably going to follow through. So I said to her, this is going to work or it's not, but it's definitely not going to work if I keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So this is where we're at, and she just has, I suppose. I mean, there's a degree of faith she's got to have that I'm going to do that, but I've always historically shown that I will do that. So she's fantastic, and had no issues there whatsoever. And obviously now I'm providing for the family. I'm not, like I said, I'm not making a fortune, but I'm providing for them. I wouldn't disadvantage my family so that I could do something for me. That I wouldn't do that. But I'm providing for them. I'm a happy parent and husband because I'm doing something I enjoy as opposed to what Bobby Sandu's calling now. Wait a sec. What? Bobby Sandu, what do you want? Oh, he's at the door. Give me a sec. I'm going to open this door. Give me a sec.
He's stuck outside.
Sorry, mate.
That's all right.
I had him move my car and then he got stuck outside the gym.
All good.
Anyway, so she was cool with that, and I made it work, and like I said, I'm a happy guy because I'm doing something I love and I enjoy. If I had to keep working for someone, especially like I said, I kind of have that little bit of an issue with authority. And my issue wasn't like if you're an authority figure but you're doing a good job, I'm cool with that. I'll follow you.
Yeah.
My issue is with authority figures, and this is a lot. Just because someone is in a position of authority doesn't mean they're actually good.
Yep.
We've all seen this in all different job roles.
Yep.
I saw it particularly in the government departments. It wasn't about how good someone was. It was
tenure.
Just tenure, or just how they could put together a resume or whatever. It was not based on merit. And so that was something always an issue. So obviously I work for myself. So everything that is good and bad here is on me.
Yep.
And I really like that.
Yep.
That's not for everybody. I think a lot of people actually like the autonomy of having someone else do all that, and they just got to rock up, and that's totally cool. But for me, it's like I enjoy being in charge of my own destiny. Yeah. So yeah.
Out of curiosity, I don't want to talk too much about kids, but I'm just curious. When kids came along into the picture, did that reframe any of your outlook on things, or did that I guess how did it change you as a person?
Oh Jesus! I mean, I suppose if you said having children didn't change you, you're a fucking cyborg. Like, I think having children for me is the absolute best thing that I've ever done.
Yep.
And prior to having children, because you don't understand that feeling, it's hard to comprehend that. So if I'd never had kids, I wouldn't have, like I've always said this, if I had never had kids, I would have been totally cool with that because I didn't know what I was missing out on. So like to go to someone without kids and say, oh, you're missing, it's like, well, no.
They don't understand it.
They don't understand it, so they don't know what they're missing out on at all.
Yeah.
I try to liken it because a lot of the guys at the gym are young guys. They don't have kids, but that's kind of like an interesting thing we talk about. And I'm like, well, you think about, a lot of them have got a pet they really like, a dog or a cat or whatever. And I'm like, you think about that, that dog you really fucking love. Well, think about this. If you had kids and you had to go and hit that dog in the head with a fucking hammer because it was going to be something positive for your kids, you'd do that in a heartbeat. And that's like, I think if they ever think about it like that, like, oh Jesus, like there must be like some crazy fucking love you have for these like little people you make. Yeah. So for me, like the best thing I've ever done is become a parent. Like there's no better thing. You can give me an ADCC, winning athlete, and that's nothing compared to like just getting to be a father. So it's the best thing. It probably makes you. I've always been very responsible, so it didn't make me more responsible, but it assists with that side of things, and I suppose it gives you a probably more of a purpose because it gives you a different purpose. I shouldn't say more of a purpose. Plenty of people that don't have kids still have great purpose. Yeah. It gives you a purpose that's pretty fucking cool. Like you've got this thing now where you're trying to. It's like this genetic trick where we're trying to keep alive our next lot of DNA. Like. Yeah. So there's this thing that's inbuilt into us that's been around for a long time that seems to be something that we want to do. Yeah. So it's a pretty cool thing. Like if you haven't got kids, I would say if you've got someone you really love and it can actually stay with them, it's a good thing. But it's it's also the most difficult thing I've ever done, hands down. Like nothing else remotely compares. Like dude's trying to break my leg off or string. There's nothing compared to having children. Having children is the biggest commitment, and if you're going to do it well, it's a big commitment.
Yeah.
I think some people that it's not a big commitment to, they don't do it that well. They kind of like farm out a lot of responsibility to everybody else, and that's not necessarily maybe a good thing for everybody involved. But it's for me like, so has it changed me? Yeah, of course. I mean, but everything does.
Yeah.
I'm not, like we talked before, you're just the sum of all the things that are happening to you. But, being a father is definitely the thing I'm most proud of anything else. Yeah.
Well, it's almost like, to go back to your manager analogy, when you become a parent, nobody gives you the handbook and says, this is how to be a good parent. The parents who want to be a good parent will then go and do some research and try and understand, okay, what are some of the things that, like, why is my kid like this? How do I, what's the right word? Coach the right behaviors that you want out of your children? Because, there's an innate part of them which has their own personality and how they respond to things. But then there's also a way that we talk to them as a parent, or how we try and educate our kids that they emulate back to us as well, right? So, you can either choose to be that parent who doesn't really get engaged with that, and then you just basically, whatever happens, and then when your kids are feral, you're just questioning why. Or you go and look at that and you go, okay, perhaps I need to pull in some other resources. And when I say pull in other resources, I'm not saying go and talk to another parent and go, what do you do when your kids do this? It's actually like trying to read, books about, parenting or whatever the case may be, to try and influence your own perspectives, because at the end of the day, you're still going to have your own parenting style, and your kids aren't going to have their own personality. Nobody else can tell you what is the right or wrong way. There is no right or wrong way, but there is just a way that you found to be a great, that leverages your strengths in educating your kids. And likewise, as a manager, nobody teaches you how to become a manager. A lot of these people are just employees that become managers. And then it's like, okay, how do you now manage people? Well, you probably need to go away and actually take some lessons in what's important when it comes to managing people. You need to actually separate yourself from the physical task now, because it's not your job to now do the task. Yes, you might have been the best person at doing the task. That's why they made you the manager. But for you to be an effective manager, now you need to actually get your people to do the task to their best of their ability, as opposed to you doing it for them. Because then all you get is people who just expect you to do everything.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, parenting, I've always said this, parenting's the most, I just said before, it's the most difficult thing that I think anybody can do. And it's also maybe the easiest thing you can also do as far as getting yourself into that predicament. I mean, other than just breathing, which is an automated response, right? If you can't manage breathing, you're in a tough position. As far as like conscious decisions you making a child, and when we've seen some fucking all-time morons still easily make children. If anything, they make children at a higher rate to the rest of society.
Have you seen that movie Idiocracy?
No.
So it's a pretty good movie. It's basically, the premise of it is that the dumbest people in the world are the ones that have the most kids, because the educated ones are essentially putting off the decision because they're waiting for the right time. So over time, what happens is that the population becomes dumber and dumber, and they end up in this predicament where the world is ending because everything is so gimmicky and marketed. So and what happens is the guy that's the protagonist in the movie, he gets frozen in time or whatever, and he's a dumb guy by today's standards, but in the future he's like a genius because everybody's that much more stupid. And part of the problem was they don't have any food because they were watering the crops with Gatorade, because they thought, electrolytes, everybody needs electrolytes.
Yeah. Hey, the sad thing is it's more of a documentary nowadays than it is a movie. I'm worried, but I look at that as, the rest of them running slow, and I don't even have to run that fast to go ahead of them. So, all my family, but it's like the easiest thing to do. It's like it's a biological trick not a biological trick. It's a biological urge to fuck another human, and it doesn't take any degree of skill.
No.
So that's a problematic thing, but it's the most difficult thing, and the most you can cause a lot of damage if you don't do it well. If you're a shitty parent, you're potentially going to make a shitty kid. And that shitty kid becomes a shitty adult, which then becomes another shitty parent with another shitty adult, and the circle of life continues. And
I would say, no, I think it's more the bell curve, right? There's going to be 20% of kids that no matter what, they could have the best upbringing in the world, but they get into drugs and like they just life just ends up fucked for them. Then there's the 20% at the top where they could have the worst circumstances, you know, parents are split up, domestic abuse, all those sorts of things, but they still end up creating a beautiful life. And then there's the people in the middle where how their parent treats them and how they're nurtured will make an impact on their life, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah. I remember that's why I spoke generally when I said that.
Yep.
It's not an absolute,
but
it's a definitely a contributing factor.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you do a terrible job as a parent. More often than not, that kid's probably going to be lacking a whole bunch of tools, and they're going to struggle. It just keeps going. I used to sit in the prison system. I used to see just lifelong families who had no one in their whole lineage had a job. They were always just covered by the government, and they just never got out of the cycle. And they would come and visit their parents in jail every weekend. And then when they're old enough, you know, they'd come full circle, and it was you just see it. It's a real thing. But you know, it's the most. You got to get a license to drive a car, and people would be shocked if you had said, "I'm not going to bother getting my license. I'm just going to drive." People would be like, "You can't do that. That's like unfathomable." Yeah. Yet there's no fucking license for having a child, and I think there's more of an issue with people creating shitty humans than crashing their car into me because they don't have a license. They would probably work out driving to some degree at some stage if they hadn't done that ELS test and whatever they had to do. But you know, that's a bigger talk for another time. I don't think we can cover world population in this podcast today. Yeah, well, I reckon we'll have to do it again. So it's for me to avoid being a shitty parent, I do need to pack up and go pick up my daughter from school. Good man. It's been great. No, thanks for the chat, man. Right? I appreciate it. I was happy we finally got it done. We kind of tried to make it happen. But and hopefully we can. Hopefully I'll be there at Wollongong Wars so I can watch you. In the cage. Yeah, I got another week and a half. I've got to make 80 kilos, so I got a little bit of. I don't know if dieting's the right word. I'll do most of that in water, but most of the cut I've got to do in water. But I'm kind of I'm looking forward to the match. I'm not looking forward to a couple of days of hyperhydration and then one day of total dehydration. But you know, other than that, it's going to be fun. If people want to follow me on Instagram, and that's it. Find me on there, and at Aussie Leglock Luke. Yes. Yeah, I know it sounds a bit fucking shit, but I want it to be just Leglock Luke, but some other guys got I've been over this with Sonny Brown on the podcast. some guy who has a fucking page with horses as his Instagram thing, and apparently a leglock is like a horse term. I don't know why. It's something that happens with horses. Yep. I don't know. And this bastard, he doesn't even look like he uses his Instagram. He could just give it to me, but I haven't actually asked him. I should ask him and see if he'll just give it to me. But anyway, ask him first, and then I can. I'll tell you some sneaky ways to steal it. I like this. All right, I better switch off the mic. All right, man. Good man. Thanks. Appreciate it. Good stuff. Thanks.